Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I am Susan Shirk. I am Director Emeritus, Chair Emeritus of 21st Century China Center here at the School of Global Policy and Strategy, UCSD. And it's a real pleasure to be able to collaborate with the Center for Taiwan Studies, led by Professor Pinghui Liao, on today's discussion about the Taiwan election. There's been tremendous interest in the Taiwan election, as well there should be. Taiwan's a very vibrant democracy, and it's always very exciting to see what the outcome will be. This time, of course, people are particularly interested in the outcome, not just for the governance of Taiwan itself, but for the implications for the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait, the relationship between Taiwan and mainland China and the United States, as well as other countries. So it's a great opportunity we have today to hear from some of the leading experts on Taiwan politics. Tom Gold, who's here in the room, is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at UC Berkeley. And he is a longtime expert on Taiwan, having studied there and done a lot of writing and research on Taiwan. And in addition, we have UCSD's pride, Nathan Batto, who's a PhD from UCSD, who is, I'm happy to say he was, I helped advise him when he was here. And he, after receiving his PhD here, he moved to Taiwan and became Associate Research Fellow at the Institute of Political Science at the Academia Sinica and the Election Study Center of National Chengchi University. So he is really considered one of the leading experts on Taiwan electoral politics. And so it's a great opportunity we have of hearing from him today virtually from Taiwan. I should mention that Tom Gold was an election observer in Taiwan, so we have a lot of on-the-spot expertise about this election that we can all benefit from. So we're going to begin with Tom, who's going to kind of lay out the big picture of the historical context of this election. And then we'll move on to Nathan, who's going to talk a little more specifically about the outcome of the vote, the pattern of the vote in Taiwan. Okay, Tom,
Great. Well,
take it away.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks to the center and both centers for inviting me and for arranging for this program. Is this loud enough? Am I loud enough? Good acoustics. It's really an honor to be here in San Diego and to participate in this seminar. And also, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you for the extraordinary program that you have built here on China and now on Taiwan. And it's with a great deal of jealousy, admiration and jealousy, that I congratulate you and confirm that from my perspective, San Diego's leading the way now on China studies in the UC system. So can I go now after I've said that?
Well, you did that perfectly.
But since we didn't rehearse that, I would say, well, in lieu of an opening joke, I said. So I'm also quite honored to be with Nathan. I'm not sure when we first met, but for sure we were together in 2000 when Chen Shui-bian won the election, the first non-KMT party member to win. And I have a photo, I don't know if Nathan remembers, that I couldn't find but it's of the two of us wearing bien mao. If you remember those knit caps for Chen Shui Bian, the picture of us modeling our bien mao.
Okay, so we're getting a partisan view here?
You're getting it. We went to the headquarters, and you get swag wherever you
I
go.
see.
So I have a whole room full of hats. So this time, I just came back on Monday from Taiwan, so I blame my incoherence on jet lag. And this was my 10th or 11th time going to Taiwan for elections, either for the president since 2000, or for the Legislative Yuan since 1989. And in the early days of observing these elections, I and other people were hosted by either a government agency or a quasi-government agency. And there was a sense of monitoring to spot irregularity. So people say to me, "Oh, were you in Taiwan monitoring the election?" I said, "No, I wasn't monitoring. I was observing the election." That even in the early days, I was never asked to sign anything, that I thought it was a clean election and the people that I was with. But now for sure, people go to Taiwan to observe all of the steps in these elections. So the group that I was with, it's the third or fourth time that our little group has gone together. And now we're self-funded, it's a fake, which surprised a lot of people, that we're paying our own way. And we're observing the election as scholars of Taiwan. And one thing that we do is to keep account of how much has changed. I personally keep account of how much has changed over the 55 years since I made my first visit to Taiwan as a language student. And I'd like to say it was when I was in kindergarten, but unfortunately, I was already in college. As a sociologist, my main interest is in institutionalization of democratic practice and values, as well as how new things become taken for granted. From this perspective, the changes in Taiwan have been absolutely mind-boggling, one might even say miraculous. The very idea that the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which grew out of a protest movement under martial law, and one of whose founders, Chen Shimingda, died on the 8th, has been the ruling party, the Zhizhengdang, for 8 years, to the point where many people told us that they're already sick and tired of the DPP being the governing party, and they want something fresh. This fact is really hard to comprehend in its testimony to the fundamental changes that have gone on in Taiwan over time have now become institutionalized, part of the landscape. So this group that I was with, this is the third or fourth time we've gone to Taiwan to observe elections together. We all speak Chinese, have all lived in Taiwan and China, off and on for many years. We relied on our own guanxi to help set up meetings with people. Our itinerary involved briefings with leaders of all three parties, including an hour with Taiwan People's Party, the TPP, candidate, former medical doctor and Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je, just before polls closed on Saturday. Polls closed at 4, and we had an appointment with him at 3 and talked all the way till 4. He was very relaxed. But we also met with academics, social activists, government officials, candidates, and attended giant evening rallies. So to talk a little bit about the context, we were reminded several times that 2024 is a year of elections around the world, including, of course, the US. Taiwan came first chronologically and set a very high standard for all stages in this process of campaigning, voting, vote counting, and gracious acceptance of defeat by the losers. Several times it was suggested that if any place needs monitoring of its elections now, it's the US. The election in Taiwan attracted global attention, largely because of the China shadow, not only because of its intervening in Taiwan's affairs, but also because it's challenging many other countries in the region. And Susan alluded to that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. There were several references to The Economist cover story of several weeks ago that called the Taiwan Strait the most dangerous place in the world. Also casting a shadow were the wars in Ukraine and Gaza that offer some comparisons with the Taiwan-China relationship God forbid. The Hong Kong situation that was on people's minds in the 2020 election was rarely mentioned. There was a very large number of foreign correspondents from around the world, which is important. It's not just the US and Japan, the usual supply, but foreign correspondents from around the world. Many parachute in for a short spell, but many are now based in Taiwan, having been expelled from China. So they bring a deep knowledge of China, as well as having been in Taiwan now for a couple of years. Their knowledge and familiarity with the situation in Taiwan and its history is much deeper than that of journalists in the past. I didn't have time to read or listen to much of their reporting, but some of our group were frequently ducking out to be interviewed. And in general, they were positively impressed by the correspondence. And Nathan can comment more on that, as you've probably seen his name in the interviews that he gave. Nathan will lead the way in discussing many of the details, but I want to stop here with the somewhat corny statement that the real victor in this election was democracy itself in Taiwan. I mentioned that there will be elections around the world throughout this year. In 1995, I attended a major conference in Taipei on the theme of the third wave of democracy, a term which was coined by Professor Samuel Huntington, who, along with many other scholars and activists from around the world, came to Taiwan. The optimistic global trend of the mid-1990s seemed to be in the direction of democratization. Unfortunately, the zeitgeist in 2024 is the reverse wave of democracy in all regions of the world. So what Taiwan has accomplished is a step in holding back that tide. So I will now turn it over to Nathan for detailed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's great to get that context. And now, Nathan, why don't you give us your take on the election outcome, the victory of William Lai, and the as well as the elections in the legislature. And was there anything here that you found surprising, or was it all totally predictable?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be back in San Diego, even if I'm not there. I'm really happy that this event is happening. I'm really happy to learn that San Diego has now a Center of Taiwan Studies. So thank you very much for having me here. This election was not surprising. If you had asked observers before the election what's the most likely outcome, they would have said, I'm not sure, but if we had to guess, it would probably be Lai first, Ho second, and Ke third. And that's what happened. Maybe some people were surprised by the margins. Lai beat Ho by 7 and Ho beat Ke by 7. So there might have been some people who thought the KMT would be a little bit closer. There might have been some people who thought the TPP would be a little bit further behind in third place. But more or less, that was not a surprising outcome. If you ask who won and who lost, the answer is no one. They all had something to be happy about, and they all had something to be not so happy about. On election night, there weren't many really beaming, happy faces. There were some grim faces, and there were some mildly unhappy faces in all sides. The happiest party was probably the TPP, who came in third, which is maybe surprising. But the DPP won the election. They won the presidency. That's the most important office. They got their third term. They lost in the legislature. They lost about 13 seats, I think. So they didn't do too well. They actually came pretty close to maintaining their majority. There were 11 seats that were decided by 4% or less. And The KMT won 9 of those. So the DPP was actually pretty close to eking out another majority, but they didn't. The KMT, they won several extra seats in the legislature so they increased their delegation there. They didn't win the presidency, and they didn't come maybe as close as they thought they would. I think they might have done the worst of the 3 participants. The TPP, they closed very well. The polls had them down a little bit more than 7%.
Nathan, can you just explain to people briefly about this third party? Because, for a long time, of course, the original ruling party, the Kuomintang, dominated. Then the Democratic Progressive Party won the presidency, also the majority of the legislature. And now this third party, is really very significant. So can you just say something about that?
Yeah, the Taiwan People's Party, it's the TPP, not the DPP. I wish they called it the KPP, which was the K party, but they didn't. It's founded by Ko Wen-je, who was the mayor of Taipei City. He's a former surgeon at National Taiwan University Hospital. It is a party founded by him and centered around him, and there are 3 significant members of which he is head and shoulders above everybody else. It is almost a personal party. The party stands for what he stands for, which is not very clear. He has kind of a populist stance in that his rhetoric is anti-elite, that anti-establishment. The 2 big parties are doing a bad job. They are corrupt, and they're corrupt on purpose, and that's why your life is miserable. So there's a moral appeal that populists make that says that's why your life is miserable. It's because the 2 big parties are selling you out. That's the centerpiece of his discourse. What does he want? He doesn't really tell us. He's going to have the best of everything, and it's going to be great because he's not going to be corrupt. He's going to work hard, and he's going to be sincere, and he's going to do all the good things. He's going to have good relations with China. He's not going to compromise Taiwan's sovereignty in doing it. How does that work? Trust me, it works. So we don't really know what he will be doing, what he will stand for, where he will go. At the beginning, he'll probably cooperate with the KMT to form a majority in the legislature, because they do hold the balance of power in the legislature. And his whole brand is opposition. So he will probably cooperate with the KMT, but we don't know that. He might surprise us all and decide that he wants to go into government. Probably not, but you never know with him. So they were the happiest party on election night, even though they came in third, because they outperformed expectations, and they will be around for 4 years and play an important role.
Okay, great. So were you surprised that that 40%, in your view, is that less than you expected or more than you expected?
I was not surprised by 40%. I think the DPP had hoped for more like 43 or 45. The KMT thought it was closer. I think that this is probably a pretty median out of, not outside of the realm of expectations.
Okay. And let me also ask you, a couple of months ago, the KMT and the TPP tried to form a coalition to compete with the DPP. And mind Joe, the former president, KMT president, tried to broker this coalition, which fell apart, presumably because the power sharing arrangement there was no real consensus on what kind of power sharing arrangement there would be. If they had been able to form a coalition, would they have won the presidency?
Not necessarily. It would have been a very close race. The KMT and TPP did not form a coalition because well, first of all, neither one of them wanted to accept second place on the ticket. That's actually the most fundamental thing. The KMT did not want to slip into third place in a two-party system. Taiwan's a majoritarian system. Third place is a terrible place to be. They didn't want to set up the TPP as a long-term rival that might displace them. And the people who really opposed the coalition within the KMT weren't the national leaders. It wasn't Mainjo. It wasn't those, it was the local leaders who really didn't want another competitor in their local elections. The TPP, for its part, didn't want the coalition because they needed Coenza at the top of the ticket to pull in their votes. If they didn't have a presidential ticket, nobody's voting for them on the party list, and they're not holding the balance of power in the legislature today. So that was always a very dicey proposition, and I've heard people say it was doomed from the start. That was never going to happen, even when Ma Ying-jeou brought them together. He tried to smash a coalition together, and the two parties resisted. They had their famous press conference where they came out with a 6-point agreement that didn't really solve anything about how the coalition was going to be formed, how the joint ticket was going to decide who was at the head and who wasn't, because they left too many details unresolved.
Okay, so I'd like to ask both of you now, how do you see the consequences of this election for the governance of Taiwan and for Taiwan's cross-strait policy? And maybe you can also refer to Lai's acceptance speech, which I read the acceptance speech, and it seemed to be very diplomatic in terms of the cross-strait policy, and also diplomatic vis-a-vis the other two parties. So how do you see this new situation in Taiwan with a DPP executive branch, but not a majority in the Legislative Yuan, and how are they going to work together, and what will be the implications for domestic policy and cross-strait policy? So maybe, Tom, would you like to?
I can, there are a couple of, I had wanted to say a few things from what Nathan, based on
Sure.
what Nathan, if we've got time. First of all, the polls seem to be pretty accurate in predicting the outcome. I think one of the last ones I saw had the KMT up 10 points ahead. I'm sorry, the DPP 10 points ahead of the KMT, and it ended up at 7. Right. So, but it was off on that, but nonetheless, it did predict the three. The way that they turned out. And for people who aren't familiar, when you mentioned party list, everyone in Taiwan who voted got 3 ballots. One ballot is based this is for the Legislative Yuan, or LY. one ballot was for a representative from your district where you're registered. And the LY has 113 seats. 73 of them were for the district. Then there were 6 seats reserved for indigenous people, the Yuanjumin. And then there were 34 seats, which are, you said the party list, or known as Bufan Chu, is they're not based on a district, but everyone, their third ballot is for a party. And the party seats in the Legislative Yuan are apportioned on the basis of how many, the percentage of votes you get from the party ballot. I'm not sure if that made sense or not, but that's where Ke, I think Nathan was emphasizing this, Ke personally did not win the presidency. And if I'm not wrong, they didn't nominate anybody for the LY, did they, for district?
They nominated 11 people, but none of them were going to win.
Yeah, but they did get eight seats based on the percentage of overall party votes that they got. So that's something that in America, we're not familiar with something like that. And on the Mainjo, he had 2 major missteps, in my view. One was that what I thought really.
In brokering the coalition.
But no, for the election. One was the handshake, which I thought was a non-starter from the beginning with the three of them. And the other was he gave an interview to Deutsche Welle. When was that, Nathan?
On Wednesday, I think.
On Wednesday, where he said that we should trust Xi Jinping. And that went over like a weather balloon. I mean, that shot itself down, I think. And so people said that Mainjo, he represented pretty much everything wrong with the KMT. It's a bunch of elders who are out of touch with the reality in Taiwan. And people had said some the role of youth voters or non-voters was very critical. A lot of young people said, we're sick of the DPP, which I said was a surprising thing because it had a reputation when it began out of the Dangwai, the non-party movement of the beginning of the 70s, that their whole adolescent life had been under the DPP, and they wanted a fresh change. And they didn't like the KMT. The KMT's reputation among youth is really bad. And every time I've gone to these elections and gone to KMT briefings, it's a bunch of the same old men who say, we're going to rejuvenate the party. We're going to recruit more young people. And as somebody of that cohort, they're not doing a really good job of that. But it's the same mantra over and over again. So young people, some of them said, we have been told young people aren't going to vote. But then we were also told that if they vote, they'll vote for Ke because he's a breath of fresh air. And the point is, what does he stand for? That's the question that Nathan raised. So he's not elected, but if he has his party, his personalized party has 8 seats in the Legislative Yuan, is their main role going to be obstruction, or is it going to be trying to work out an alliance with the other parties on an issue by issue basis? Because Ke himself, it's hard to say. There's not a lot of difference among the 3 parties on their cross-strait policies and on attention to domestic issues. So that's one, just some things to add. There was an ad that was on YouTube. I don't know if it was on TV, but it's on YouTube. You can watch, which sort of gets to your question about live. It's President Tsai Ing-wen is driving a car, and Lai Ching-te is sitting next to her. And they're having a conversation about, mostly it's about continuity and you're doing a good driving and then I'm going to drive. And then at the end of it, she gives him the keys. And if I watched it correctly, she gets out of the car, it's by the seashore and just sort of walks into the ocean. I'm not sure where she ended up. And then if I saw it correctly, Xiaobi Kim is sitting in the back seat, right? She's going to be the next person who's going to sit to the she's not driving that we know of. But in any event, so I think, Susan, to answer your question, is Lai was stressing continuity. But of course, if there are people who don't like what Tsai Ing-wen has done, and if you go to the KMT, they talk about how terrible she is and what it's ruined Taiwan. It's a straight critique of everything. So to answer the question, part of it is the DPP is going to try to push through a lot of mostly social issues. And the KMT position I didn't find is that much different that there, and what role will the TPP play in either supporting those policies or obstructing them? And on cross-strait, again, nobody, in terms of one country, two systems and the 92 consensus, I think everybody agreed there's no real market for that in Taiwan. And they're not going to, among the sort of general populace. And so that they'll continue to try to, lie. Xi Jinping would have nothing to do with Taiwan. Probably going to say the same policy for lie. And the first thing that the PRC's reaction, other than his speech, the first reaction was to take Nauru as their latest diplomatic party. And I Googled it. Nauru's population is 12,511. That was 2 days ago. So yeah, it's not going to be a make or break in terms of world politics, but it was, again, it's just to show that I can do this to you.
Okay, so we're going to get to Chinese reactions in a minute, but first, Nathan, do you agree that the cross-strait policy will basically be one of continuity? I mean, in his acceptance speech, Lai said that he wanted to sustain the status quo, and he didn't utter any new formulation, but he seemed to be stressing continuity.
Yeah, that was actually the main theme of the entire campaign. When a vice president runs for the presidency, there has to be a theme of continuity, almost inevitably. But usually the vice president will at some point say, but I'm different from the president. I'm my own person. And Lai really never took that step. For the entire campaign, his main talking point was, Tsai has set out this path, and I'm going to continue this path, both in domestic and in international relations and in cross-strait relations. Again and again and again, he stressed, I'm going to continue Tsai Ing-wen's path. I'm just going to deepen it. I'm going to take the next step and do the things that she's been doing and do them more thoroughly. And so on cross straits, he really doesn't have a new idea. His acceptance speech was very boilerplate, I thought. Everything was standard. We're going to have amiable relations with China. We will have exchanges on the basis of respect and equal status, which is, standard TPP rhetoric. China's not interested in equal status, so there won't be any exchanges. But everything was what we've heard before. And he was trying to be presidential. The other two candidates, when they got up, they were giving concession speeches and trying to keep their followers reasonably happy. Everybody was depressed, but not really. The TPP was kind of triumphant. But Lai was trying to say, I'm now the president-elect. And so he was trying to sound responsible and diplomatic and authoritative, rather than trying to be a cheerleader and pep up your spirits. I expect fully to have continuity in most things. There was Tom was talking about Ma Ying-jeou, and I want to stress that interview was on Tuesday or Wednesday. The election is on Saturday. And the first reaction of the KMT was to disinvite Ma Ying-jeou from the election eve rallies. Ma Ying-jeou was made persona non grata, which is just unthinkable. He was a two-term president and the leader of the KMT. He's the one who the 92 consensus is his pride and joy. There is still the KMT is still insists that there is a market for the 92 consensus. That's still their position. There is no market for one country, two systems. But Xi Jinping has defined one country, the 92 consensus as one China, and one China means the 92 means one country, two systems. The KMT rejects that. So they think that the 92 consensus means the ROC. And they think there's still a market for that. The polls say there's not much of them. It's not popular enough to win an election, but they're still dedicated to trying to use the 92 consensus as the framework for engaging with China. But they're not in power, so it's not coming back.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit, just very briefly, about the China mainland reaction. Lei Guang was saying this morning that the press treatment of the election, it's like invisible. They've really tried to be as low key as possible to keep discussion of the election out of the media. So most of the press commentary says, mainland reaction low key. My own view, I'll throw in here, is that this really is a significant test for Xi Jinping's administration. Will its pragmatism versus its rigidity? It seems pretty obvious to most observers that the tougher pressure tactics and shutting off dialogue with Taiwan has not been successful from the standpoint of preventing a trend toward independence, or much less achieving reunification. So the question is, will mainland decision makers recognize that and adjust their approach in trying to resume dialogue and to strengthen economic and social ties between the two societies, or will they ramp up the pressure? And I think most observers assume they'll ramp up the pressure, because people have concluded that this pragmatism doesn't exist. I'm always the eternal optimist, thinking that, especially in view of the fact that Wang Yi, who is the leading foreign policy advisor in China today, was previously the head of the Taiwan Affairs Office and the architect of this 3 links ECFA trade agreements across the strait under Hu Jintao. So, and also Wang Yi is the man who negotiated with Japan on Yasukuni Shrine. He's like a pragmatic problem solver based on his history, not necessarily based on his rhetoric in the past few years. So the question is, might Xi Jinping, I believe that probably Wang Yi still believes that Beijing should try to strengthen these ties, and that it would make sense from the standpoint of the PRC's national interests of avoiding war at the same time as preventing a more accelerated trend toward formal independence. But most observers are, skeptical that such a thing could happen. So I don't know. I think it's a very interesting turning point and a kind of test of the decision-making style and intentions of the PRC leadership at this point. Comment?
Very, very good. I try to be optimistic as well, which is very, very difficult. You do have the rigidity of Xi Jinping, and so it's the repercussions of that are not only being felt, say, across the strait or in the region, but in many ways, Taiwan's international profile has improved over the course of the last couple of years, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where you have in Lithuania and in Czech Republic and in Estonia, you have Taiwan offices being given more visibility and more profile than they had in the past. So I think a lot of these countries are basically so we don't care what you think. We're going to go and follow our own interests. So I think that's one thing. You've also got, Xiaobi Kim is the vice president, and she did an extraordinarily successful job in Washington. He is raising Taiwan's profile and good feelings, so soft power, among other things. And it's possible, I think in many ways, it's a brilliant choice of making her as the vice president because Lai Ching-te does not have the international experience. But of course, taking her out of Washington is also, that's the downside, is that she's not there to press the case. But one further point I wanted to make is subnational relations across the strait, as well as China's, say, subnational relations between the US and China have also continued or revived to a certain
local
like sister cities, right, or youth groups or various, part of the exercise of soft power, I think, is to say, we want to continue these people to people, even if at this level, things are not hunky-dory. So there are things that are going on that do have some potential for positive outcomes.
Okay, let's give a last word to Nathan and then we'll open it up to questions.
There is, I've heard somebody say there is a potential, since Lai has such credibility with the Taiwan nationalists and Taiwan, there is a potential for an only Nixon could go to China moment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. As for the point about Europe, I gave more media interviews to European media outlets than American outlets this year, which surprised me. I never heard of some of these places or these newspapers and what have you, but there was a lot of interest from Europe in this election, which surprised me because Europe traditionally isn't very interested in Taiwan. But there is quite a bit of interaction still with China, and it's aimed a lot at younger people still. So the Little Red Book, which for people of my age and older means something entirely different, but Xiaohongshu was a website aimed at young people, and it's quite popular here in Taiwan. The children are learning something different about China than people even in their 20s. So China's soft power is a real thing that might be changing attitudes towards China in Taiwan. But other than that, we still have plenty of religious exchange. We still have people going to China. There is no Chinese official tourism coming to Taiwan. 10 years ago, we were inundated with tour buses full of Chinese tourists, and that all stopped when Tsai Ing-wen was elected. And so from my point of view, it's been very nice. We can go to nice places and not be completely swamped by masses of Chinese tourists. But that might be something that China decides to relax if they take a more pragmatic approach.
Okay, great. Let's open it up to questions now. Come on, ladies. Yes.
Hi, and thank you for this very amazing talk. And I would like to ask a little bit about, like you have mentioned about Taiwan, Ukraine, and Gaza, and Palestine that has been facing some kind of like struggles, and there are some kind of like comparison and contrast within these three regions. And I just want to ask if you could elaborate what are the possible like similarities and differences between Taiwan, Ukraine, and Gaza, and how the US government could possibly react to the issues in these three regions. Yeah, thank you.
That's a big question.
You probably know more, but Norm, if you want.
Well, I have one thought about that.
You want?
If
Oh,
you want, but you know,
I'll
you
throw
go
some
first.
stuff out. First of all, there is there's a phrase that you hear a lot in Taiwan now, mainland, which means the doctrine of doubting America. So this relates to strategic ambiguity, and that sort of, would America really come to Taiwan's defense if it was under attack from China, either provoked by Taiwan or provoked by China? Under what circumstances might the US intervene, and how would they do it? So that's the skepticism, the email run. Then the other, what I was referring to, we had a fair amount of discussion about Taiwan's defense posture and buying weapons. And what is it, $19 billion worth of weapons that are somehow, they haven't been delivered yet. They've been ordered but haven't been delivered. But then the question is, what is the appropriate defense posture for Taiwan? What can Taiwan do? So they talk about the porcupine strategy, and if China attacks, would it be an amphibious landing? Would that even be possible? If they're just, if they're not just, but I mean, if it's a missile attack, that sort of thing. What should Taiwan have in its defense capability? So there's a lot of discussion about tanks and javelin. I don't know what I'm talking about. Javelin missiles and stingers is the vocabulary I picked up. What's the appropriate thing? That if you are so small and being attacked, even Ukraine is not small, but compared to the Soviet Union, it's an uneven, it's imbalance. So what can you possibly do? And the question is one thing that Taiwan would be expected to defend itself for, I gather it's 2 weeks before the United States would come in. We heard that phrase of 2 weeks a bit. So again, a lot of it ties into the email.
Do you want to add to that, Nathan, or you don't have to if you don't want to? We can move on to something else.
I think the main takeaway from Ukraine in particular, Taiwan hasn't paid a whole lot of attention to Gaza, but the main takeaway from Ukraine is, gosh, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go through that. Americans can look at this and be inspired by Ukrainian resistance. Taiwanese look at that and say, those houses look bombed out. I don't want my house to be bombed out.
So I guess I'll just mention that after 9/11, the Bush administration, and we had a Chen Shui-bian government in Taiwan, and the Bush administration made very clear that it was focused on countering terrorism, and it did not want to have to also cope with a fight in the Taiwan Strait. And I remember in 2003, when Wen Jiabao visited Washington, President Bush stood up and sent that message very clearly to Taiwan. So now we have not just one fight, but we've got wars, Ukraine, Gaza, Red Sea. I mean, the situation in the Middle East is just bleeding more and more widely. So there's, from the standpoint of a global power like the United States, there are so many crises to be dealing with. So this is a moment, I'd say, when the United States is really trying to reinforce a stable situation in the Taiwan Strait by its messages and diplomacy with both sides of the Taiwan Strait. More questions? Yes. You.
So basically, I wanted to because I think during the interview that Ma Ying-jeou had with the German press, he actually said something along the line that you have to trust Xi Jinping when it comes to cross-strait, policies. But then have to trust someone, I feel like that's kind of open to like different interpretations. But like Liberty Time, Sunli, and Zero Shibao, they pick it up on trusting the Xi Jinping part instead of like the whole context. I feel like, but then I feel like how KMT reacted was not a very smart decision. But my question is actually, so basically when the blue and white party, they're trying to form the coalition, both Ko Wen-je and Eric True, they were saying that 60% of the Taiwanese people, they wanted a change in government. As we can see as the result of this election, if you add the 34% for KMT and the 26% for Ko, that's exactly what they trying to say. And then also like, social political wise, like at the end of the term, they always have the satisfaction poll for every president. For Chen Shui-bian, when he stepped down, it was 18%. For Ma Ying-jeou, was around 9%. But for Tsai Ing-wen, I think at least 40% of the people in Taiwan are still happy with DPP being in power. So I was kind of wondering about how do you guys think about the change in the dynamic of like social political with the kind of status quo.
Well, Nathan has his ear on the pulse quite closely, and like to hear what he has to say. But so where we heard mostly about young people being disillusioned, they're bored with the DPP, they don't like the KMT, and so they're not going to vote. And the young, they kept saying 20 to 29 years old, that they're just not going to vote. So I don't know what the turnout.
It was 70
for young people.
something. Oh, young.
72.
72.
We don't know young people.
So it turned out to be 72. I'd heard 69, so it was above 70%.
I mean, to us,
Total vote.
from the United
Oh my
States, that
God.
looks like amazing.
Everybody, yeah. So I think it's just possible who you talk to is going to say, I think, Taiwan's done a great job. Taiwan's moving along, the economy's growing, they've got through COVID, world model for all of that sort of stuff. It's great, but then you've got people who are going to hate the DPP no matter what, just like people at KMT hates. So you don't know how, who you can trust. Let's see what Nathan.
Yeah, they threw around the 60% want to kick the DPP out of power. They threw around that 60% figure quite liberally. That doesn't mean that 60% agree on an alternative.
No.
And if they had formed a joint ticket, I don't think they would have gotten 60%. If you looked at the polls, when you asked who do you not want to win, who you most dislike, and you looked at like the TPP voters, there was a very solid percentage who didn't like the KMT the most. If they had formed a joint ticket, there would have been some conflict within that ticket. And I don't think it would have won. I think that they would have done better but I don't think they would have gotten that 60%. I think that probably Lai would have won a very narrow victory. The first question you asked was about, I have forgotten.
I just mentioned. the German press.
Interview.
Oh, Ma's made a mistake. Yeah, in that interview, that single quote was the takeaway quote. The rest of the interview was even more pro-China. That was the good soundbite, so that's what they took away from it. And I thought that soundbite was a little bit ambiguous because it wasn't clear in the interview whether he meant you have to trust them when they say they're going to attack. We have to take that seriously. Or when they say they're going to make a promise to give Taiwan some special status or whatever, you have to trust them. It wasn't clear whether he meant you have to trust them in a positive sense or you have to trust them in a negative sense. But it just didn't sound good. But the rest of the interview, I thought, was even more out of touch with Taiwan's mainstream public opinion.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I want to question an assumption in this election. So we can see a growing population who want a fresh government, and kind of like apathy toward cluster relations, tired of using cluster relations as a tool or instruments in the elections. And as you mentioned before, there's a growing soft power of China inside Taiwanese society. So I think in the long run, if there is a possibility that cluster relations will not be a determinant, will not dominate Taiwan's election in the future, and I think there's some validity inside here, right? Because people have a consensus that China is a problem to Taiwan. But right now, people also have a consensus that cluster relations should not be a instrument or continue to be a dominant factor in elections. So how do you view this long-term tendency of dismissing cluster relations as an important topic in elections?
Okay, let's start
Nathan.
with Nathan and then Tom.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the
The
question.
question is, the cross-strait relations dominating electoral competition in Taiwan and people's frustration with that in Taiwan. And do you anticipate that, or is that in fact a correct conclusion to draw, or is it not? And could this change in the future?
Yeah, I think people would like to not have to make decisions based on cross-strait relations, but there's really no choice. China is the existential question for Taiwan, and China keeps putting pressure on Taiwan, and it's something that Taiwan has to deal with. You can try to avoid it, and Coenza has tried to avoid it, but he can't. He has to take positions on what to do with China, even though he's not in government. When he was Taipei mayor and they did the Taipei Shanghai Forum, he still had to take a position on one China. You can't avoid it. It is the question about Taiwan's future. And so there are lots of people who want to have left and right politics, as we know in the United States and in Europe, but it's just not practical when the China cleavage is dominant. It divides you and forces everybody into two sides. Those two sides are going to be big tent on everything else, which is why we didn't really talk about there's not a partisan division on things like social housing or healthcare. Those are valence issues because the two parties are big tent on everything else other than China. And that's really unavoidable as long as the cross-strait relations is tense and continues on the same path.
We're nearing the end of the hour, so Tom, last word
Well, I was
is
just going to
yours.
say that I think people would prefer to vote more on Rice Bowl issues. Mentioned social housing, inequality, jobs, energy. I mean, there's so many different issues that came up that we haven't addressed. And we heard the phrase China fatigue is just not having to deal with it. But so from the electorate's position, point of view, they can vote for somebody as president or maybe an LY representative they think supports a particular position they like on China, but it's not a local, it's nothing that can be decided locally. So it's going to be out of their hands. So I think there's a certain, can we get on with stuff that affects us in our daily lives? There's so many issues to deal with.
Well, I want to thank the two of you for a really rich discussion, good questions from the audience as well. I apologize to the people listening virtually that we weren't able to take your questions. Stay tuned for more discussion of Taiwan and cross-strait elections here at 21st Century China Center. So thank you very much.